The bar was alive with noise. Motor oil and leather mingled with the smell of fried food, the clinking of glasses echoing off wooden walls. Laughter and shouting filled every corner, a chorus of confidence and bravado that came from years of claiming the space as their own. It was the kind of place where strangers were noticed and tested. And that's exactly when Keanu Reeves walked in. He didn't push through the crowd. He didn't demand attention. He simply entered, calm and composed, moving with quiet purpose. His long hair fell naturally over his shoulders, his jacket simple but stylish, and his eyes scanning the room, not with judgment, but with awareness. Every step he took was measured, every gesture deliberate, every breath unhurried. The bikers, naturally territorial and loud, noticed him immediately. A few of them nudged each other, smirking. "Who does this guy think he is?" one whispered. "He doesn't belong here." Their laughter was not cruel at first. It was curiosity mixed with amusement, a typical reaction when someone dared to enter a place they thought they owned. Keanu slid onto a bar stool, nodded politely at the bartender, and ordered a drink. His voice was calm, steady, entirely unassuming. There was no arrogance, no drama, just the quiet presence of someone used to walking into any room with respect for himself and others. That simple act, the act of being unbothered, of moving through tension without reacting, was exactly what unnerved the bikers. They were used to people reacting, fear, aggression, resistance, but not calmness, not composure, not dignity. They decided to test him. One of the bigger bikers leaned back, grinning. "Hey, what are you doing here, pretty boy?" he called. "This isn't a place for movie stars or quiet guys like you." Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't even glance directly at him. He just smiled faintly, polite but firm, and lifted his glass. The staff noticed the shift in energy. Other patrons sensed it too. The air in the room changed subtly, as if a new rule had entered. Appearances could not define influence, and confidence wasn't loud. It was calm, deliberate, and unshakable. What the bikers didn't know, what no one in the bar realized yet, was that this quiet presence wasn't the end of the story. There was someone else on the way, someone whose arrival would turn the evening upside down. And when that moment came, everyone would learn a lesson about respect, power, and the kind of quiet authority that leaves a room holding its breath. The bar had a reputation, not just for its drinks or food, but for the people who claimed it as their own. Leather jackets, chrome bikes parked outside, and the loud, confident voices of those who had long ago decided this was their territory. To them, outsiders were either entertainment or a nuisance. Keanu Reeves, however, didn't fit either category. He entered quietly, nodding politely to the bartender and choosing a seat at the far side of the counter. His jacket was simple, his shirt neutral, his presence calm yet magnetic. He didn't scan the room to assert dominance. He simply observed, taking in the patterns of conversation, the subtle hierarchies of laughter, and the way the bikers occupied space, as if claiming ownership of it. The bikers were immediately curious. Some smirked, some whispered. A few nudged each other, gesturing toward him. "Who does this guy think he is?" one muttered. "Walking in here like he owns the place?" Others laughed, loud and rough, but Keanu didn't react. He didn't glance at them, didn't tighten his jaw, didn't sip his drink in irritation. He was calm, composed. A quiet energy radiated from him, one that demanded notice without demanding obedience. The staff took note. The bartender raised an eyebrow, polishing a glass more carefully than usual. A waitress passing by paused mid-step, recognizing the aura of someone who had walked through countless rooms, seen countless challenges, and handled them all with poise. It wasn't fear that Keanu inspired, it was attention, respect. Quiet earned respect. The bikers, however, were used to testing strangers. They were used to seeing reactions, intimidation, anger, even fear. That's what gave them confidence. And since Keanu showed none of that, they decided to escalate, just a little. One of the bikers, taller and broader than the others, leaned over the bar with a grin. "Hey there, movie star," he said mockingly. "This isn't a place for quiet types like you. You sure you belong?" Keanu lifted his glass, slightly in acknowledgement, a small, polite gesture. "I just came for a drink," he replied softly. "Nothing more, nothing less." The bartender and patrons watched carefully. The tension in the air shifted, subtle but unmistakable. The bikers had expected a reaction. They had expected drama. But calm composure, as it turns out, is far more disarming than aggression. A few bikers whispered among themselves, their laughter dying down. "What's with him? He doesn't care," one asked. "No clue," another replied. "It's unsettling." Unsettling indeed. The room had become a silent theater, everyone unconsciously holding their breath, waiting for the next move. The energy was not hostile yet, it was expectant. Something was about to happen, and everyone could feel it. What no one knew was that Keanu's quiet presence wasn't the climax. Someone else was coming, someone whose very existence carried authority and experience. And when Steven Seagal walked into that bar, the rules would change instantly. The bikers, so confident in their dominance, would be forced to confront the difference between loud bravado and true strength. The stage was set. The tension was thick. And in just a few moments, every person in the bar would witness a lesson in calm authority, respect, and the subtle power of presence. Lessons that no one could ignore or forget. The bikers were restless. They had tried to provoke Keanu with words, testing his patience, mocking his quiet demeanor. But every attempt had failed. He didn't react. He didn't glare. He didn't snap back. He simply sipped his drink and observed the room, radiating calm authority. That, more than anything, unnerved them. One of the bigger bikers, a man with a jagged scar across his cheek, leaned closer, dropping his voice into a mocking growl. "You think you're tough, huh? Walking in here like you belong." Keanu turned his head slightly, just enough to meet the man's gaze. His voice was soft but steady. "I belong wherever I choose to be," he said calmly. "I'm just here for a drink." The words were not loud, but their effect was immediate. The biker blinked, unsure how to respond. He had expected anger, confrontation, or fear, but not composure, not patience, not this quiet confidence that refused to escalate the situation. The other bikers leaned in, laughing nervously. "Oh, so he talks back," one said. "Better watch your step, pretty boy." But Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't stand, didn't reach for anything, didn't even change posture. He simply looked at them, unshaken, and raised a subtle eyebrow as if to say, "You can try, but it won't work." A waitress passing by noticed a shift in energy. Patrons around the bar had stopped their conversations, sensing that the tension had moved from casual mischief to something heavier. The room had become a theater of quiet anticipation, the air thick with unspoken challenge. One of the bikers, frustrated, leaned over the bar, knocking a glass slightly with his elbow. "Why don't you do something? You're just sitting there like some statue." Keanu set his glass down gently. "I already am doing something," he replied. "I'm remaining calm." The comment hung in the air like a soft bell. It carried more weight than any shout, more impact than a fist could ever have. The bikers shifted uneasily. Their laughter faltered. The room's energy changed from rowdy and aggressive to tense and uncertain. A few patrons whispered to one another, glancing at the bikers, then at Keanu. Even the bartender paused, polishing a glass more slowly, watching, realizing that the usual rules of dominance were being rewritten in front of him. The bikers glanced at each other, noticing the subtle power in Keanu's composure. They realized that intimidation only works on those who allow it to work. Here was a man who refused to be rattled, whose calmness and quiet confidence had turned their bravado into awkwardness. Then, the subtle sound of the bar's entrance door opening caught everyone's attention. A hush fell. Heads turned. The bikers instinctively straightened, suddenly aware that someone else had arrived. Steven Seagal walked in. His presence was immediate and undeniable, though still calm and composed. He didn't shout. He didn't point. He didn't threaten. Yet the air seemed to shift around him, thick with authority and quiet power. The bikers froze, unsure how to react. The usual rules of intimidation no longer applied. Keanu glanced toward him, a small smile crossing his face. Seagal's arrival wasn't about escalating conflict. It was about reinforcing a lesson that no one in the room would forget. True strength and authority do not come from aggression. They come from composure, respect, and quiet confidence. The stage was now set for a reveal that would leave everyone in the bar especially the bikers, humbled and aware of the difference between loud bravado and real power. The moment Steven Seagal walked into the bar, the atmosphere shifted subtly but unmistakably. It wasn't a dramatic entrance with shouts or gestures. Yet every person in the room felt the weight of his presence. Patrons paused mid-sip, conversations halted mid-sentence, and even the clattering of glasses seemed to soften. There was something about him that demanded attention, not through force, but through quiet authority. Keanu remained seated, calm as ever, but his gaze briefly met Seagal's, a small, respectful nod passing between them. The bikers, on the other hand, stiffened instantly. Their confidence, built over countless nights of intimidation and loud bravado, faltered in the face of this unexpected arrival. One of the bikers leaned toward his friends, whispering nervously, "Is that Steven Seagal?" Another's eyes widened. "No way. That's him. The martial arts guy. Real deal." The realization spread quickly among the group, turning their earlier amusement into uneasy awareness. They had thought the situation would be simple. A quiet guy, a few laughs, maybe a little show of dominance. Instead, they were facing two men whose presence alone radiated calm, composed strength. Seagal moved slowly toward the bar, his posture relaxed but deliberate. He didn't scan the room aggressively. He didn't challenge anyone directly. Yet every step he took drew attention. Even the bartenders seemed to straighten, instinctively sensing that this man's authority was not to be questioned. The bikers whispered among themselves, attempting to regain composure, but their words lacked confidence. Their usual smirks had vanished. The laughter that had once echoed through the bar was replaced by quiet murmurs of recognition and apprehension. Seagal stopped a few feet from Keanu, his eyes briefly surveying the group of bikers. There was no hostility in his gaze, only calm observation. Yet that calm carried more weight than any shout could. He could see their nervous glances, their attempts to assert dominance that had suddenly become pointless. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone was a lesson. Keanu, still seated, adjusted his posture slightly, a subtle reminder that he too was not to be underestimated. The two men shared a quiet energy, an unspoken understanding that strength could be silent, dignity could be commanding, and true authority required no aggression. The bikers' movements became smaller, their gestures more hesitant. One of them attempted a smirk, leaning toward the others as if to reclaim some confidence, but the effort fell flat. Even the patrons at the bar could sense the shift. Dominance was no longer determined by loud voices or intimidation, but by presence, patience, and composure. Seagal finally spoke, his voice low but clear. "Strength isn't about who's louder or faster. It's about how you carry yourself when faced with challenge." The words cut through the room like a gentle but firm wind. The bikers glanced at one another, realizing that their usual tactics, mockery, threats, posturing, were ineffective. They had been measuring power incorrectly, assuming that volume equaled authority. Now they understood that real power was far subtler, far more dangerous, because it didn't need to announce itself. Meanwhile, the bar's patrons watched in awe. Some had seen Seagal in movies, some had only heard stories of his martial arts skills, but everyone present could feel the lesson unfolding in real time. Respect wasn't being demanded. It was being earned, silently, through presence and composure. Keanu finally stood, lifting his glass in a subtle acknowledgement of Seagal's entrance. The gesture was simple but commanding. The bikers froze completely. Their mockery had evaporated, replaced by awareness, unease, and reflection. They were realizing slowly that appearances could be deceiving, and that underestimating someone based on demeanor was a mistake they might regret. The room's energy changed. The tension, which had been thick with the expectation of conflict, transformed into an atmosphere of observation. Everyone watched, everyone waited. The bikers, previously dominant, were now under quiet scrutiny. They had been humbled, not through aggression, but through composure and calm authority. Even the smallest details, the tilt of Seagal's head, the steady gaze, the relaxed posture, conveyed lessons more powerfully than any confrontation could. The room understood. This wasn't about who could shout louder. This was about who understood presence, patience, and respect. For the bikers, it was a revelation. They had entered the night expecting to intimidate, to assert control, and to command attention. Instead, they were witnessing a lesson in humility and quiet power. The stage was now perfectly set. Everyone in the bar, patrons, staff, and bikers alike, knew something important was about to happen. And when the next words were spoken, the lesson would crystallize. Strength doesn't shout, authority doesn't threaten, and respect is earned, not taken. The air in the bar was thick, not with smoke or chatter, but with anticipation. Every eye seemed to be drawn to the two men standing in quiet command, Keanu Reeves, composed and observant at the bar, and Seagal, whose very presence radiated authority without aggression. The bikers, once loud and cocky, were frozen mid-step, their previous bravado fading in the wake of subtle but undeniable power. Seagal's gaze swept the room, calm but firm, landing briefly on each of the bikers. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point or scold. He simply looked, and in that moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. The lesson was being delivered not with force, but through presence. "Everyone here has a choice," Seagal finally said, his voice low, deliberate, and measured. "You can react with aggression, or you can observe, learn, and act with integrity. Strength isn't measured by intimidation. Respect isn't demanded, it's earned." The bikers exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time that night, they felt small, not physically, but mentally. They had entered the bar expecting to dominate, to assert their control with volume and mockery. Instead, they were confronted by calm authority that required no displays of force. One of the bikers, still attempting to reclaim some confidence, took a step forward. Who are you?" he asked, voice shaky. "You're not from around here, are you?" Seagal allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I'm someone who understands that appearances can be deceiving," he said quietly, "and that actions, patience, and composure are far more powerful than shouting or intimidation." Keanu, seated calmly at the bar, finally spoke. "And sometimes," he added, "the people you underestimate are the ones who can teach you the most important lessons about respect and presence." The bikers froze again. Recognition began to dawn in their expressions. Some had seen Seagal in films or heard of his martial arts expertise. Now, they realized that this was no exaggeration. The man in front of them carried real authority, earned over years of mastery, discipline, and experience. And Keanu, quiet and composed, was no less impressive in his subtle command of the space. The bartender, who had been polishing glasses nervously, exhaled slowly. Even the patrons, previously merely spectators, leaned in slightly, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding before their eyes. This was not a scene of violence, but a demonstration of true power, the kind that didn't need to yell or threaten to command attention. Seagal approached Keanu, and the two men shared a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of mutual respect. It was clear to everyone in the room that this was not about confrontation. It was about teaching, observing, and guiding. The bikers shifted uneasily. One whispered, We messed up. We shouldn't have underestimated him." Another muttered, "This isn't a joke. We're out of our depth." Seagal's gaze softened as he addressed them directly, not angrily, but with measured authority. "Judgment based on appearances is a mistake. Confidence built on fear is fragile. True strength comes from composure, understanding, and the way you carry yourself even in tense situations." The effect was immediate. The bikers' body language changed. They slouched slightly, hands loosening from fists, eyes lowering from defiance. The room itself seemed to relax, the tension giving way to a quiet understanding. Keanu raised his glass slightly in a small, polite toast to Seagal. "Sometimes, the most important lessons are taught without force," he said. "Respect and calmness speak louder than aggression." The bikers exchanged one last glance, then slowly backed down. Their attempt at dominance had failed, not because they were overpowered, but because they had misjudged the situation entirely. True authority had no need for intimidation, and they had just witnessed it firsthand. Seagal nodded toward the bikers, then toward Keanu, and finally scanned the room once more. "Let this be a reminder," he said softly but clearly, "that underestimating someone based on appearances is a mistake you may never forget." The room exhaled collectively. The bikers slumped into their seats, subdued but enlightened. Patrons whispered among themselves, impressed not by violence or theatrics, but by calm dignity and quiet authority. The bar, once filled with loud bravado and tension, had been transformed into a place of reflection and awareness. Keanu and Seagal stood together briefly, not as aggressors, but as embodiments of composure, patience, and respect. Their presence had taught a lesson that no yelling could ever convey. True power is subtle, quiet, and undeniable. And in that moment, the bikers, the patrons, and the staff all realized the same truth. Real strength isn't measured by volume or intimidation. It's measured by presence, patience, and the quiet confidence to command respect without demanding it. The bar, once loud with laughter, shouts, and the constant hum of motorbikes parked outside, had settled into an unusual calm. The energy that had been dominated by aggression and mockery was now replaced with awareness. The bikers, previously so confident and brash, had been humbled, not through confrontation, but through presence, composure, and quiet authority. Keanu Reeves remained seated at the bar, calm and collected, his subtle nod to Seagal, acknowledging the man's arrival and silent lesson, reflected both respect and understanding. It was clear that neither of them needed to raise their voices or assert dominance physically. Their authority was in their quiet demeanor, in the way they carried themselves without arrogance. The bikers shifted awkwardly in their seats, unsure how to react. They had entered the bar thinking dominance was proven through intimidation, loud voices, and mocking others. Now, they were confronted with a different type of strength, one that didn't need theatrics, aggression, or fear to command attention. They realized they had misjudged the situation entirely. One of the bikers, younger and less confident than the others, muttered under his breath, we shouldn't have done that." The others, too, sat silently, processing the lesson that had been delivered so subtly yet so powerfully. Seagal, noticing their hesitance, spoke again, his voice calm but firm. "True authority isn't about making others feel small. It's about showing strength in how you respond, how you carry yourself, and how you respect others. That is the kind of influence that lasts." Keanu lifted his glass slightly, giving a small, polite toast. "And sometimes," he added, "the most powerful lessons are learned without confrontation. Quiet confidence speaks louder than aggression ever could." The patrons, who had been watching with wide eyes, began to murmur in agreement. The staff relaxed, realizing that the previous tension was gone. No one had been humiliated. No one had been forced into submission. Instead, the lesson was clear. Respect is earned through presence, composure, and integrity, not through fear or loudness. Even the bikers, slowly absorbing the lesson, began to understand the difference between bluster and real power. Their body language softened. They were no longer trying to assert dominance. They were observing, reflecting, and learning. It was a transformation that didn't require punishment, anger, or humiliation. It came purely from witnessing quiet authority and composure in action. Keanu turned his attention to the bar staff. "You treated everyone with respect," he said, nodding toward the bartender and servers. "That's what makes this place strong. Not fear, not aggression, respect and professionalism." Seagal added, "Strength is subtle, leadership is quiet, and integrity is visible, even when no one is challenging you." The bikers, humbled and thoughtful, nodded. Their earlier bravado had dissolved, replaced by awareness and reflection. They had learned an invaluable lesson without violence. Appearances can be deceiving, and underestimating someone can have consequences far beyond what they expected. As the night settled, the bar returned to its usual rhythm, but with a noticeably different energy. Laughter and conversation returned, but they were quieter, more respectful, more thoughtful. The patrons carried with them the subtle lesson of the evening. True strength isn't loud. Authority doesn't require intimidation. Respect is earned, quietly, consistently, and without spectacle. Keanu and Seagal eventually left the bar together, calm and unhurried, leaving behind a room transformed. The lesson had been delivered flawlessly. Composure, integrity, and quiet confidence hold far more weight than noise, aggression, or intimidation. And for everyone who witnessed it, the patrons, the staff, even the bikers, the night would be remembered not for any dramatic showdown, but for the enduring impression of true, subtle, and undeniable strength. The moral was clear. Real power doesn't shout. True leadership inspires, humbles, and commands respect without ever needing to demand it. The bar had returned to a quiet hum, the echoes of the night's tension replaced by a calm understanding. Patrons spoke in softer tones. The staff moved with subtle pride, and even the bikers sat quietly, reflecting on what they had just witnessed. It wasn't a fight that had changed the room. It was composure, presence, and quiet authority. Keanu Reeves and Steven Seagal had left an unmistakable impression. They hadn't shouted. They hadn't used force. They had simply shown that strength doesn't always need to be loud, and respect isn't something you can demand. It's something you earn through integrity, patience, and calm confidence. For the bikers, the lesson was humbling. They had come expecting to dominate, to test someone they thought was weaker, and to command attention through intimidation. Instead, they were confronted with the subtle but undeniable power of two men who carried themselves with dignity and awareness. Their bravado, once a shield, had dissolved in the presence of true composure. One of the younger bikers, the least experienced of the group, whispered to his friends, I think we've been measuring power all wrong." The others nodded slowly, processing the realization. They weren't humiliated by aggression. They were taught through observation, reflection, and an example of what real strength looks like. The patrons, too, had learned. They had seen firsthand that appearances can be deceiving. Quiet individuals, unassuming in demeanor, can command respect without raising their voices. Dominance isn't about noise or threats. It's about presence, patience, and composure. Keanu's subtle smile, his calm gaze, and the polite, almost casual acknowledgement of Seagal's presence had conveyed more than words ever could. And Seagal's quiet, deliberate authority reinforced the message. Leadership is not aggression, it is influence. Real influence comes from integrity, confidence, and the ability to remain composed when tested. This story isn't just about Keanu Reeves or Steven Seagal. It's about the universal lesson that we all can carry into our lives. Real power doesn't demand attention, it earns it. Respect isn't something you force. It's something you cultivate through consistent, thoughtful action. Speech balloon comment respect. If you believe true strength comes from kindness, composure, and quiet confidence. Round pushpin share where you're watching from. Let's build a community that values integrity and calm authority. Sparkles, remember, every day presents opportunities to show patience, act with dignity, and lead without arrogance. True leadership isn't measured by noise, threats, or intimidation. It's measured by the impact you leave on others through your actions and presence. As the night continued, the bar had returned to normal, but it would never be the same again. Patrons would remember the subtle power of calm composure, the lesson of quiet authority, and the reminder that underestimating someone based on appearances can be a costly mistake. The bikers would leave with a new awareness. Dominance is fragile, respect is enduring. And for everyone else, the story was a gentle but firm reminder that true strength lies not in aggression, but in patience, integrity, and the quiet courage to lead by example. Keanu and Seagal had shown that the most powerful lessons are sometimes the ones delivered silently, through presence, dignity, and consistency. And in doing so, they left an indelible mark, a story that would inspire anyone who believed that real authority and respect are earned, not demanded. The final truth was simple but profound. True power is calm, leadership is quiet, and respect lasts far longer than intimidation ever could.